Hello and welcome to the She Is Me podcast. And we are here today with Jodie Solberg. She is with Psyched Up Success, and Jodie is actually a founding member of She Is Me. And so I'm sure you recognize her name and Psyched Up Success, and you see her face all over the place with She Is Me. But we decided that we were going to have or record this podcast about hypnobirthing, and it's something that just sort of came into my view, and I wish I would have known 30 plus years ago when I started having kids, because I went through the standard Lamaze and the breathing techniques and so on and so forth. But this is something, and having talked to Jodie about this is something that I think everybody needs to know about. Every woman who is thinking about having a child or is pregnant or is expanding her family needs to know about this way of giving birth. It's amazing. Hi, Jodie.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and to share more about hypnobirthing with everyone.
It's amazing. So, as you've explained to me, hypnobirthing is a combination of childbirth education and birth hypnosis.
Yes.
And so what's different about first of all, the childhood or childbirth education versus what we've been or what we know or what we are being taught about childbirth? You know, everyone has their what to expect when you're expecting book, and walks you through the steps of childbirth, and you talk to your friends and you talk to your doctor. But I know in my experience, there were so many things that nobody ever told me about. And so what's the difference between the education that we get now versus what we would get in hypnobirthing?
Hypnobirthing is much more thorough, I believe. It's truly a philosophy of birth as much as it is, that education piece and a series of techniques for things like relaxation, visualization, affirmation, self-hypnosis. So we're teaching you how your body works. So really all about physiological childbirth and what all of those natural processes are. So we teach you about all the different kinds of hormones. We teach you about the communication and the changes in your body and your baby's. We talk all about what to expect, like you said, in detail, so that you can have very informed decisions. You can have very specific birth preferences of the things that you do want, the things that you don't want, the questions that you want to ask of your doctor and your care team. And you can feel like you're empowered and in the driver's seat the whole time. And it's really important to prevent trauma. So one of the things that we focus on in hypnobirthing is actually healing any past trauma or any past negative beliefs or thoughts, feelings around childbirth, and then help you to prevent any birth trauma for yourself and your child, which is really key, because one of the things that you and I talked about when we were first discussing this, like, birth is such a traumatic experience. And the belief in hypnobirthing is that it doesn't have to be, that, pain and fear and trauma don't naturally have to be part of that birthing process. And so I think that's one of the biggest things, right? That pain and that severe discomfort and, all of these things that we hear about and that we see in the media, it doesn't have to be what your experience is. A lot of what we experience is based on what we believe and what we expect. And so we teach you all about your natural body's processes so that you understand how it can be, and then you can build what you want your experience to be like.
And I think that's the key, because with anything, if you know how it works and what to expect and what all of that means and what it is, then you can visualize it happening in your body and you know that it's natural, and you know that it's part of the process, and it doesn't scare you, and you are like, oh, that's that thing. Okay, that's that hormone, and that's how I'm feeling right now. So yeah, that's amazing, because you don't really, you learn, I think as a woman, I learned the most about birth by talking to other women about it. And a lot of women will give you information that you don't even ask for if you're pregnant. So that's one thing that's really funny. But you don't, like you don't even know what to ask. You don't even know what questions to ask your doctor sometimes, because you don't know how things work. You're never taught exactly, what's happening. That, people will say, oh, the baby's dropped. Well, what does that mean? Yeah. And what are, like, for instance, my son was face up instead of face down in the birth canal. So no one ever said to me ahead of time, if this happens, this is what the process will be. Or if this happens, it's just like, you're there, he's trying to come out, everyone's going, he's face up, we've got to try and turn this baby around. And you're like, what? What's happening? I mean, talk about trauma. You don't know what's happening. And they're all operating around you without taking you into consideration, or without even taking the baby into it's just a thing. Like, we're this thing, this thing, we're on the bed, it's almost textbook, like, this has to happen, this has to happen, this has to happen, instead of a personal experience. Like, I don't know, it's so traumatic. It was so traumatic. And then all the things that happen afterwards, and they just send you on home, and it's so it's so disheartening, right, that we get treated this way. And one of the the ways, hospitals are corporations, right? They run on dollars and on profit, and so they get you in, they get you out. I mean, I had my daughter at 1 a.m, and at noon they came in and told me I had to go home, and I refused. I said, absolutely not. You call my doctor right now. I'm staying here for at least another 24 hours. Like, I didn't even finish. They didn't even finish up with me until like 4 a.m, something like that. And 6 hours later, they want me to go home with a newborn and a toddler at home, and my body's still, full of birth hormones, and it's just unacceptable to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And self-advocacy is a huge piece of what we teach. And one of the things that I think surprises people sometimes, because of how thorough the classes are, is all the information they get about things like positioning, about if the baby's turned this way, this is what that means. This is how to shift that naturally to help the baby to get into proper positioning. I mean, we have a lot of information there, and it's actually a 5-week course. So it's 2.5-hour classes over 5 weeks. So it's a very in-depth education process. And like I said, about, half of that is going to be your visualization and relaxation and self-hypnosis techniques. And the other half is going to be all of the childbirth education. And so we go a lot more in detail than most classes, and doing some research around other classes, a lot of times it's, 1 4-hour class, and you're supposed to learn everything about pregnancy, about birth, about breastfeeding, and that's it. Okay, here you go. And it's very, quick. And like you said, you don't know half of what they're talking about when you're going through the process. And so, we aim for you to feel really educated, really empowered, and really like, okay, I can say what I want. I can communicate what I need. I can be the part of the process. Instead of having things done to me, I get to be involved. And this is, your birthing. That's the thing. It's
Right.
you and your
Right.
baby working together. Like you said, you're not just a number. You're not just a thing. You're not just another one, going through the assembly line.
Right. And that's exactly how it feels. Like you're just in and out assembly line. We have more people to give birth. And so we need the room. We need the room.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting aspects of this, and I always love to pull these subjects around to this particular subject because it's one thing that I think influences us all as women, even if you aren't aware of it, but it's patriarchal learning, right? Like everything that we've learned, how to be a woman, how to give birth, how to look, how to feel, how to, everything has been sort of directed by patriarchal oppression.
Yeah.
Of women since it started. And it's and I say this all the time, like it's a revolution, and join the revolution and stop and learn about these things so that we can change them, right? Let's learn about why the way that we give birth happens the way it does now, and learn about it, and let's change it. And changing it is really hypnobirthing, right? Like this is changing the way that we are supposed to be punished with pain for sin, right? So you and I talked about that, and talking about midwives. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because it's really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So patriarchy was around long before ancient Greece. But in ancient Greece, one of the good things that they had was Hippocrates, right, founder of the Hippocratic Oath, that's how most of us know who he is, had established midwifery, right? Understood about natural physiological childbirth, was teaching about that, was encouraging, women to help other women, so there were midwives, there were healers. And that was very widely, accepted, encouraged, and important. And then if we fast forward to around the 13th century, when all of the European witch trials started, the Catholic Church's couple thousand year reign of terror, that's when midwives, healers were condemned, were murdered, were executed for being healers. And so basically the Catholic Church's view at that time was that childbirth should be as painful as possible as punishment for Eve's original sin. And so that's where a lot of what we know now, widely about childbirth and what it's supposed to be like, and all the fear around it came from, because there were a lot of women who died then in childbirth. There were a lot of people who just got shut into a room and figure it out. They weren't allowed to have help unless they were going to send a doctor in to basically cut you open, and then you didn't survive. And so that's where a lot of this fear and a lot of the beliefs around what childbirth is supposed to look like, and that's where it occurred, right? That's where it originated. And now it's honestly still being perpetuated, because the only thing we ever see on TV is people on their backs in pain screaming on television when they're having children. Right. And it just keeps that going. And with modern medicine, it started back then too, right? And in an attempt to try to help, often a lot of the medical interventions that were created did the opposite, or were more harmful than they were good.
And I don't know about anybody listening, but both times my children were delivered by male doctors, right? And the second time, I was probably I was probably 2 hours out, and I asked him to come in, and he took his time. Like, I asked the nurse to find the doctor, and he took his time coming in. And when he came in, he was very sort of flippant and eating candy and, just kind of joking around and not really being, serious with me. And sort of just walked out of the room and said, "Yeah, I'll be back. You're not ready yet," and just didn't address anything that,
Dismissive, sounds like.
he was very dismissive. And about 20 minutes later, everybody came rushing into the room, bells and whistles going off, flipped me over, not telling me what's happening, all this stuff going, da, 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 da. Well, my daughter had either stepped on or grabbed her umbilical cord, and her heart rate had dropped. She wasn't getting an oxygen. All this stuff was happening. They didn't tell me till about a half an hour later what was going on. And one of the nurses came in to tell me. And I was like, wow. So right then, like, I knew something is wrong. I could feel it. They didn't check me. He just dismissed me. He walked out. I could have lost my baby right then. Mm-hmm. So that was super traumatic.
Scary.
Even before I actually started pushing or, delivering. Mm-hmm. And so we talked about, and I want to talk about the pain aspect as well, because, I opted for no pain medication because I asked the doctor if I took pain medication, would my baby get the pain medication? And he said yes. And I said, well, if I didn't drink caffeine or have, Tylenol or anything like that when I was pregnant, why would I want you to fill up my body with pain meds? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't, I wouldn't even have a cup of coffee. And now I'm going to, give her all of these drugs, right? Well, while I'm pregnant, like, no. And I learned Lamaze, and, the breathing helped tremendously. But I know now that that's not the best way to go. But, when, and talking about the pain, like, even if I did, like, at some point ask for help with the pain, they wouldn't help me because I was too far dilated and they don't have any other solution, right? So that's a problem. And it's so difficult. You can't do anything. You're in the midst of giving birth, so you can't do anything about it. But when you're dismissed and you ask for something and dismissed and you don't know what's happening, you feel so powerless. And so you've got everything else going on that you're completely powerless over, and you're just sort of, and then you're being dismissed by all the other people. So when we talk about hypnobirthing and self-advocacy, I think that's such a huge reason to do this. Learning, knowing, taking responsibility for your body, for what's happening, being able to speak up, being able to ask, for help or demand help if you need it. And being able to talk about what you need because you know about what's happening, right? Mm-hmm. That is so critical, so important.
Yeah.
So can we talk about the pain part of this? Like, how does hypnobirthing help you through the pain from recognizing what's happening to suppressing it?
Absolutely. Yes, I would love to talk about that, because pain and like severe discomfort, all of these things do not need to be an accepted part of, well, that's just how it is, right, when you're birthing. And what's really wonderful, with hypnobirthing is that, we can't ever guarantee complete pain-free experience. But at the same time, there are so many women who've had a much more comfortable and often more painless type of an experience, because you do have things that you know to do, right? Like you said, you felt like completely powerless. There was nothing that you could do. They wouldn't give you any pain medication, and you just had to deal, basically. And so we're teaching so many different techniques to reduce that pain, that discomfort, and to keep the pain from really occurring in the first place. Because what happens is we have two different sets of hormones, right, that we can release in our bodies. We have what are called catecholamines, which is this whole category of hormones that includes your stress hormones like cortisol and all the pain-inducing hormones. And then we have our endorphins, which are your feel-good hormones. And that includes things that are up to 2,000 times as strong as morphine. And so you can either release one or you can release the other. They don't occur at the same time. There's this thing called fear, tension, pain syndrome. And what that means is really just what it sounds like, is that when we have fear, right, when we have this belief, this expectation, and this fear of there being pain, what happens? Even not in childbirth, just think about any time maybe you've had a back injury or you have a chronic pain condition and you're thinking about doing something that you're afraid is going to, right, you're going to pay later, right? Or it's going to be painful when you reach for that, when you go do that activity, whatever that is. And then what happens? Your muscles start to tense up, right? And then you have the pain. And a lot of that is because when you're thinking about it, when you're visualizing it, when you're believing that it's going to happen, then there's this reaction that happens in your body, because when your brain starts things, your body follows. And so we're going to release those hormones that are going to be more painful. Our pain receptors are going to be firing on all cylinders. And so when we're talking about fear, tension, pain syndrome, that's usually, right, what we think of when we think of childbirth and what we see on television and what other people's horror stories are, your own experiences from the past. If you think about all those things that happened to you that you just described, and you were thinking about going to have birth again, right, they're going to influence your experience.
Right.
As you're going to be afraid that that's going to happen again. And it's going to cause tension in all the places we want to not be tense when you're giving birth. And it's going to cause pain. And so with the techniques that we teach, which are several, I teach you lots of different ways to control that pain. And you can pick your favorites, and you're going to be practicing all the way up until birth. So you're going to be able to easily go into a more relaxed state, be able to visualize and be affirming yourself and be thinking about, okay, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to be working with my body. I'm going to be releasing tension, right? The whole point is release fear, release tension, so that you can then release those pain-killing hormones instead of the pain-inducing ones. And so that's a huge difference right there, just in the fact that you're like, okay, I now know how to relax, and I know what's happening. I feel empowered in the process, and I know what I can do if I start to feel uncomfortable or I start to feel like any bits of pain coming up. I have resources, I have tools. So then that right there is total 180 from the experience that you just described, of feeling like there's nothing I can do about this and everything's being done to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I went through Lamaze, and Lamaze was like, I don't know, 6 weeks, and you learn the breathing and you learn positions and you learn how to squish yourself up and, push your baby out. And I remember laughing, like at one Lamaze class, I laughed so hard I disrupted the whole class, because I just kept thinking, no way is my husband going to do this, or no way is, like, am I going to want him that close pushing, all this stuff around me. And there was just a lot of it that I was just like, that doesn't really work for me. But, you had to go through the class, and that was what you did. You went to Lamaze and you learned your breathing, and and then you got thrown into the hospital when you're ready, and then remember your breathing, and your partner's supposed to be there to remind you of all of those things, right? That you learned during the class, but those kind of all go out the window. So what's the difference then? Because I learned to relax, I learned to breathe, I learned to push, I learned those things in Lamaze. So what's the difference between Lamaze and HypnoBirthing, and the benefits of HypnoBirthing over what you learn and have practiced, even if you've had a baby before, like what you learned in Lamaze?
Yeah, I actually just, like you said, even if you've had a baby before. So I actually just worked with a couple where this is her 8th baby.
Wow.
And so one of the first things that I ask in those classes is, what is the first thing that you think of when you think of birth? And hers was anger, frustration, and bracing yourself to be beat up with baseball bats, basically.
Yeah.
Right? Bracing yourself for impact. And so, so think about how you just described with your classes. You said, okay, I learned to breathe, I learned to relax, but then you said I learned to push.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are very contradictory things. So I learned to relax and I learned to push. And forced pushing is not relaxing, right? Not at all. It's exhausting, first of all, right? It is absolutely exhausting.
I mean, I fell asleep. I would in between my pushes.
Yeah, because you were just wiped out.
Wow. I would push, and then they'd say, okay, relax. And then I'd be like, like completely snoring, wiped out, passed out. And then they'd be like, okay, now time to push again. I'd wake up and be like, okay, here we go.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So, you were relaxing in between the pushing. And so it's important to realize that forced pushing causes a lot of after effects, right? It causes a lot of challenges. So first of all, when you're pushing, you're holding your breath. So they tell you hold your breath and push as hard as you can. When you're not getting oxygen, neither is your child. And so they're constantly watching, right? They're watching the baby's heart rate. They're watching all of these things because it's stopping when they are, when you're holding your breath. There's no oxygen flowing. So we do not teach holding your breath. We do not teach that forced pushing. When you're in that position, you're talking about all smushed up and forced pushing, it can cause a lot of internal and external damage. And so it can cause a lot of pelvic floor damage. I know that there's a lot of people who have, urinary incontinence, causes, a much higher rate of episiotomies, things of that nature, because you're forcibly pushing. So in hypnobirthing, we're teaching you how to work with your body's natural pulsations. You don't have to forcibly push generally at all in order for your baby to come out, because there are natural pulsations in your body and your baby are working together for the descent down the birth canal. And so, it's that natural descent where we're teaching you to breathe your baby down. So we teach a few different breathing techniques. We teach a calm breathing technique, what's called a surge breathing technique. We use that word instead of contraction, because what do you think of contraction?
Yeah.
Contracting, right? Muscles tightening. So surges are waves instead of contractions. So surge breathing. And then
it is a wave, though.
Yeah, it is like a wave, right? Yeah. So we teach you how to kind of ride the wave.
You feel it coming, and then and then you feel it leaving. Yeah, it is definitely a wave.
So we teach you how to go with it versus, again, going against your body's natural processes. And so it's a much healthier, safer, just more natural way to birth your baby.
I
And
think
so,
I just had the vision of like a
Mhm.
calf, a cow giving birth,
Yeah,
right? If you've ever
absolutely.
watched an animal giving birth,
Yes.
you see them resting when there's no wave, and then you can literally see the wave
Mhm.
and see the baby, how the baby just comes out
Yeah.
with the natural wave of the body, right?
Mhm.
It's amazing. And yeah, why can't we do that?
We
We can.
can. We were
We
designed to
can.
do that, as a matter of fact. Yes, just like cats or cows. Marie Mongan was the founder of hypnobirthing. And so she started hypnobirthing many years ago, late 80s, to be able to help her daughter because she always wanted to have that natural birth. She had seen her cat give birth when she was little, and she's heard all of her mother's and her mother's friends' horror stories about their births. And she's like, there's a difference here. What's going
Yeah.
on?
There's a
Why
distance.
can't it be like that? And so basically she kept trying with her kids to have this natural physiological birth. This was her goal to have. And something always happened at the end where they, again, just went back and did things to her, didn't allow her to. Her doctor would say, oh, yes, like, sure, whatever you want to do, like we can try it. And then somebody else was on call or something else happened, right? And so she wanted to help her daughter to have that. So she developed this process and then spread it out to the world. But that was exactly what her catalyst for that was. And when I was working with those parents I was just talking about, who the mom's on her eighth, so her husband, that's what he said when I said, well, what do you think of his birth? And he's like, I'm confused because I grew up on a farm and I don't understand how come the human births that I've seen aren't like that.
Yeah.
Like, what is going on? And so, it really is something where when women asked that question in history, like we talked about earlier, women have historically asked that question. The answer was, well, Eve's original sin. So now this is what you have to deal with. And
Right.
that is not a biologically appropriate answer for
Mhm.
that question, right? It was something that, again, was just fear mongering. So here are the benefits, because you asked me the benefits. So
Yeah.
I want to talk
Yeah.
about those really quickly. Is, of course, eliminating that fear, tension, pain syndrome during, but also before and after birth, right? There's a whole process. So from now all the way through after the fact, eliminating a lot of that fear, tension, pain syndrome, reducing the trauma, right? Reducing and often eliminating the need for medical interventions. So things like we talked about anesthesia, episiotomy, so many different inductions, right? So many different things. Helping reduce that exhaustion that you talked about during labor so that you can actually feel refreshed, awake, and actually energized in your birthing process. So it's much, much better to breathe. So think about if you're pushing against a wall and you're pushing really, really, really hard. Think about, instead of holding your breath and pushing like that, just breathing and the
Yeah.
force behind it, right? So you're actually still have energy left. So if you're working out, you're going to do that. You're not going to hold your breath and just push with all your might, right? And then it actually can shorten labor by several hours, which is really nice. That's always a plus.
Very nice.
Yes, we like that. So it's safer, less painful, less traumatic, shorter. Like I mentioned before, reducing the risk of that pelvic floor damage. And it's really great because you mentioned your husband. Now, the birthing companion, whoever that is, for the person, it could be their, partner,
Yeah. Whoever.
whoever they want, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But generally their partner, let's say. So think about them being bonded. A lot of what we do is, again, releasing that fear and trauma, but also needle bonding. So bonding between the parents, bonding with the baby. So it's really this experience where that birth companion is an integral part of the whole process. They don't feel like an outsider. And it's something where, yeah, you're not in so much pain and you're like, get the heck away from me, right? You actually are being supported by them. So we're
Yeah.
teaching them to also utilize some of the self-hypnosis scripts to know how to, be able to go through the breathing techniques to help remind you of those visualizations, and to know all your preferences. So while you're focused on birthing, they can also be an advocate for you too, right? To
Yeah,
know,
that's amazing.
that you have somebody that's there that understands everything and that can be really supportive and helpful for you.
Well,
And
and because the model that we grew up with was,
yeah,
the man was waiting outside,
yes, they were
and
sequestered
they
outside.
stood outside, and then I mean, that's what I learned when I was a kid, and then,
Yeah.
I mean, my dad wasn't even, I remember my two youngest sisters were born. My dad wasn't even at the hospital, and he was waiting
Mhm.
for the phone call. And then he passed out cigars, and all the men stood around and smoked cigars, and yay, like
Yeah. That
terribly
actually
distressing.
started back when we were talking about how they separated women
Yeah,
and took all their support, all the midwives and everything away. That's when that started.
yeah,
Is they made the men wait outside. And
yeah.
so that's something that's still perpetuated
It's perpetuated in
hundreds of
movies.
years
It's
later.
perpetuated. Yeah, I mean, you see it, like, you see any historical film. You see the men waiting outside, waiting for the nurse to come out, and whoever the nurse, even if it's in medieval times, the woman comes out and says, you have a new child, come in, and they're waiting outside, and they're never
And they're
part of.
worried. You see them in
Yeah,
movies and they're worried. They're like, is she going to live or die?
and they're
I don't
hearing
know
all the
what's happening.
screams, and they're hearing all the noises,
Yeah,
and
and it's scary. Absolutely. And so that's what our heads are getting filled with
yeah,
all of the time. And so that's what we're programmed to believe that it's supposed to be like. So I'm going to give you two more benefits because
yeah,
these, well, one of them I think everybody's going to be really happy about. One, which is that hypnobirthing babies tend to be calmer, happier, cry less, better adjusted, better well bonded, because they didn't go through that trauma, right? They didn't go through that traumatic experience. It was less traumatic for them. And they were prepared as well. They felt supported in that process and they're, bonded right away. But even, though that's like so important, I want you to think about what happens also for the mother after the fact. So you've got this less traumatic experience for the child. So then they're calmer, happier, doing better, eating better, sleeping better, crying less, all the things. So that's wonderful. Postpartum mental health challenges are reduced or almost completely eliminated with hypnobirthing, which is why it was so important for me. I've been a trauma focused therapist for 25 years, and that's what I work with all of the time in my hypnotherapy practice is generally things like trauma and anxiety. And so for me, that was the clincher right there, because I've worked with so many women over the years to help them through hypnosis with childbirth, but a lot of postpartum challenges. And that's one of the things too that I have a big issue with in our society is we don't recognize what a lot of women are going through after these traumatic experiences postpartum, because we talk about postpartum depression. That is not the only thing there is. I've worked with women with
no,
postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum PTSD, postpartum OCD, and postpartum psychosis. There is a whole range of postpartum challenges for
mhm.
mental health that women can go through. And this, just the fact that they are so well informed, that they can be their own advocates, that they understand what's going on, that they have all of these tools that they can utilize to make it a less traumatic, more comfortable experience and be mentally prepared in a positive way versus a negative way, right? That negative mental rehearsal, we get rid of that and really focus on the positive so that they don't have those types of challenges after the fact. And that
Yeah,
was huge for me because I've had, not only a lot of clients who have experienced those things that I've worked with, trying to help them to, handle those after the fact, but also people who are really close to me that also have had those types of postpartum challenges, that if I can help women to prevent that and to heal from those past traumas and prevent new ones, I was all in for that. So that was
Yeah.
the big catalyst for me of like, okay, this is something that I can do that is going to help to heal and then prevent new trauma. And that's huge because generally in the past, I've never been able to find a way to be on the prevention side
Hmm.
when it comes to this original birth trauma. And so to me, that just stood out as a huge difference. It's the only program that I know of that really addresses that part.
Right. No, this is amazing. And that's why when I first saw a glimpse of what you were doing, I said, we have to talk about this. It
Yeah.
is truly amazing. Because you're right, like postpartum, just thinking in my own experience, I was alone. I lived in another state. I had no family or friends around me. And I remember one morning waking up, probably about 2 weeks after or so, and crying the entire day, like sobbing, crying the entire day, and calling my husband at work and saying, I can't stop crying. And he was like, oh, that's just what we heard about in that class, and you'll be fine. And he wasn't trying to be mean or anything. It was just like, oh, we knew this might happen. So, just be aware of it. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay. And so I cried my eyes out the whole day. And the next day I felt better. But it was, it was very difficult not having that support. And I feel fortunate that I just had sort of that piece of it and not something more, bigger and stronger and like some women do. And there is no support. It's like, okay, have your baby. Like I said, had my baby 1 a.m, and by noon they wanted me out. That was it. Here's your bill. Go home and be a mom and take care of that baby. And you're done here. No postpartum care, no postpartum checkup after. I mean, yes, 6 weeks late. Don't do anything for 6 weeks, do this, do that. Then 6 weeks, how are you feeling? Great. Okay, good. All right, all is well. Boom, out. But there's nothing more. There's just, okay, now you've done it. You're done.
Mm-hmm.
Off you go. So knowing that this exists and knowing that people like you, especially you, not only can help you get educated, help you through the birthing, and then any post-traumatic help that you might need is phenomenal, right? Is just amazing. Is something that we had years ago and it got taken away from us. And now we're becoming aware that this is the way that we need to care for each other and hold and support each other as women. And it's spectacular. So when I hear what's happening in the world about taking the rights away from women, I mean, we already have so many of our rights taken away from us that we don't even realize, as far as advocating for ourselves, as far as being dismissed in hospitals, about not having a choice about how the birth happens. And then if somebody does choose something that's not the norm, they're considered a weirdo or whatever, when they're actually just choosing the way that nature has intended it. And I'd like to know, any woman who's watching this, if they could comment on the video. I'd like to know how many women gave birth in traditional sense, like on their back, in stirrups, pushing, and what their experience was as far as, like, episiotomy, hemorrhoids, pelvic floor damage, bladder damage, anything like that, the physiological effects of that versus women who had maybe on their hands and knees or, another position,
Mm-hmm.
leaning over or, something like that, that did sort of a more natural stance birth. I just am curious if you want to comment on that, just to see if my inclinations are correct,
Yeah.
and which I'm sure they are, right? I'm sure they are, or you wouldn't be teaching how not to
Yeah. And there's
land back.
lots of different kinds of positions and different ones that
Right.
are for each woman and their baby. And so, yeah, it's great because we teach multiple different types of positions. So you can decide which ones you want to try, which ones are going to be more
Whichever one
comfortable for you
feels
day of. Yeah,
right.
exactly. Which are going to feel the best for you. And so, yeah, it's not just you have to be, like you said, on your back in stirrups and the force
Right.
pushing. Yeah, there's a lot of research about all different kinds of positioning and how much more supportive that is, and like you said, less damage. And so, yeah, it'd be interesting to see, people's personal experiences. So many times when I'm sharing about this with women, they get mad, right? They're like, why didn't I know about this? Why did no one
Oh,
tell me
yeah.
about this? Or I've had some who have said, oh yes, oh my gosh, I did this with my last baby and it was like night and day and it was amazing. Or they wanted to, but they didn't know how to reach out to someone, or they didn't have someone in their local area, which is why it's so amazing now with our technology. I mean, I teach virtually, and so I can reach people from all over. So it's much more accessible. People didn't know about it. So that's why we're doing this today, is we're wanting people to know, what this is and how they can access it, and how, there is an option
Yeah.
other than what you experience in the past or what you see on
Or,
television.
well, it's what you've been told is the right way.
Yeah.
But you've been told by those who want you in their building so they can charge you for their services. It's perpetuated
It's,
by all the things, Jodie, all the
it
things.
is. Yeah. Agreed.
And so how do you know if you're right for hypnobirthing?
So if this all sounds great to you, absolutely. It's for you. I do have a lot of people who are interested in hypnobirthing who want more natural births, but there's also a lot of women who want to give birth in a hospital, and they
Right.
absolutely can utilize this. And we teach all different ways, so whether you want to, do a home birth or a birthing center or be in a hospital, or if you have some health conditions and you're expecting, your doctors have told you, okay, we're going to be doing these types of interventions, or you're going to have a planned C-section. So there's nobody that can't do this, no matter
Mhm.
what way you choose to give birth, or you are going to need to give birth. It can benefit you. So that is definitely not something that's going to rule anyone out. So know that no matter how and where you give birth, hypnobirthing can benefit. If you're ready to just think a new thought, to shift your mindset around birthing, to kind of break that vicious fear, tension, pain cycle, absolutely here to
Right.
help you with that. If
Well, and
you
by no means are we saying don't have your baby
no,
in a
not at
hospital.
all.
Like
Yeah.
you can choose that. I would choose that because I would want to
That's
know
safety and security, right?
safety and security.
Yeah.
That's me. Like I want to know that if anything happens,
You're right
right.
there.
But as we talk about self advocacy, right? Being an advocate
Mhm.
for yourself and knowing what you want and how you want it and communicating that to the staff, to your doctor, to ahead of time, knowing, like you said, having your partner also being an advocate for you and knowing what your preferences are and being able to communicate that and getting your team, call them in before you're at the pushing stage, before you're in heavy labor. Call them in when you get to the hospital and be like, hey, this is how I'd like this to go. And make sure you keep me informed on anything that I might need to know,
Mhm.
because this is who I am and how I want it. And there's no shame in that. There's no, no one's no one's going to reprimand you for that, or no one's going to, well, if they do dismiss you, if they do discount what you're saying,
Mhm.
then that's when you ask for another staff member,
That's right. Yeah,
or you
that's
escalate
fine.
that.
Mhm.
Right. It's your health, it's your body, it's your choice. And that's why we fight so hard to keep choices the women's decision, right? You get to decide what happens to your body. And this is what we talk about when we talk about freedom of choice and
Mhm.
pro-choice. I'm for the having a choice about what happens to me and what happens to my body. And this means even in a birthing room, and
Mhm.
how my body is attended to by the staff within the hospital while I'm giving birth to my child. It's my choice, right?
Yeah, that is huge. So if you resonate with everything that we talked about today, hypnobirthing would absolutely be for you. And if you want to learn how to bond with your baby and bond as a family, before the baby's even born, this would be amazing for you as well. If you've had any kind of traumatic experiences in the past, this is also really incredible. And even if it was your own birth, I mean, sometimes this is me. I've definitely heard the story of my traumatic birth my whole life. And so, I went through it too with my mom, but she's been telling me the stories forever. And that's something that sticks with you. And so, whether it's releasing that and clearing that, or what we have been programmed from society, or your past birthing experiences, personally with your children that you've had previously, or if you've had loss, if you're somebody who struggled with infertility or pregnancy loss, this can be really amazing for you as well, because it can help you to release some of those fears and some of that trauma and really bond with this baby and this pregnancy. And so there's a lot of reasons why hypnobirthing would be a really great choice. I think it really is. If it feels aligned, then I would say absolutely 100% to reach out, and let's help you have the birthing experience that you want to have.
Yeah. I think that is incredible. That bonding comment is important because everyone thinks the minute your baby comes out, you're going to just love the baby and you're going to be, attached and bond immediately. And that doesn't happen with everyone. So it's important to know that ahead of time. And because then what happens is you think, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
And then those postpartum hormones start kicking in, and then, you go down this
Yeah. That's one of the
whole.
major reasons why it's so preventative and helps really reduce and almost eliminate those postpartum challenges, is that bonding. I've worked with women in the
Yeah.
past who, maybe this wasn't planned for them, or they had mixed feelings. I've also worked with women who have had other physical health challenges that
Mm-hmm.
made pregnancy uncomfortable for them, and to exacerbate some of those health challenges, with chronic pain, chronic health conditions. And so really working with them to help them to, first of all, reduce that fear, tension, pain syndrome just during pregnancy, of like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, like as I progress, is this going to cause more, physical pain and discomfort? Am I going to have these challenges? So really helping them to, eliminate that, and to have tools even throughout the pregnancy, and then bond with their babies, because they can feel sometimes disconnected. And then, like you said, what happens is they think, well, what's wrong with me that I'm
Yeah.
not so as excited as everyone else is about having this baby, for whatever those past reasons are, whether it's that trauma history or the health conditions. And so, yeah, that is a huge piece of why it's so impactful for even after the birth, because we're working with you before, during, and helping you with the after.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you, Jodie, so much. This was
Um,
so enlightening, and it's such a great offer. a new way, a new but old way of of being and learning and giving birth. And so important that we realize how much has been, how many ideas and ways have been pushed into change our natural experiences as women. And it's important. This is really, really important. Hypnobirthing, I think, is the future.
Absolutely.
It's the future. So if you want to work with Jodie and you want to find out more about it, she's at psychedupsuccess.com, and put all of her contact information in the video. Jodie, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me to have this conversation today so we can get this information out to more people. And yes, absolutely. They can go to psychedupsuccess.com. They just click on Work with Jodie. They'll find the hypnobirthing information. They can learn more, and they can contact me and book a free 30-minute consultation if they want to see if this is right for them.
Perfect. And you can follow Jodie on Instagram.
Yep.
And
everything's
Facebook,
at Psyched Up Success. Yep.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Jodie.
Thank you.